We are following breaking news out of Afghanistan, where there is word of a partial truce in our 18-year war with the Taliban. It is set to begin today, could pave the way toward a bigger agreement and ultimately a final U.S. troop pullout from that country. NBC's Courtney Kube joins us live from the Pentagon. Courtney, good to have you with us. Obviously, it could potentially be the first step in a historic change for this country's engagement in Afghanistan. What are some of the other details that we know about this deal?
So we know right now that this is the very preliminary step in what could ultimately be a peace deal. So this is an agreement between the United States and the Taliban for what they're calling a reduction in violence. So it's important to point out this is not a full and complete ceasefire across the country. It is an agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban for the two sides to no longer engage in offensive hostile actions against. Maintains the right of self-defense if in fact they're attacked. And it's important to point out, this does not include the other terror organizations that exist in Afghanistan. Of course, one of the biggest ones among them is ISIS, an ISIS Khorasan group based up in the east and sort of northeast part of the country. So if in fact this deal, once it's implemented at late tonight Afghanistan time, if both sides maintain the agreement for 7 days, then a week from now, February 29th, they'll sign an agreement between the two of them, and then they'll begin an intra-Afghan dialogue. What that means is that's when they bring in the government of Afghanistan and work towards a larger peace deal. That's when we would see more movement on things like a potential nationwide ceasefire, and then the beginning of the talks of drawing down both the U.S. and the allied troops there in Afghanistan, Eamon.
Hey, Courtney, we knew from the former National Security Advisor John Bolton speaking recently that he had never heard of a president possibly bringing the Taliban to Camp David. That was something that was rumored to have happened back in September, around the time that this first started getting out there, that these talks were maybe coming to fruition. Do we know if any similar type of ceremony or pomp and ceremony would take place once again, if in fact they make it through this 7-day period?
So there have been a lot of rumors the past several days that there might be some kind of a big ceremony. So far, all we know about is a signing ceremony that will involve the U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and the Taliban in Doha. It's scheduled to be on February 29th. But what's important to point out here is the process for monitoring both sides here. General Scott Miller, who's the head of the U.S. and the NATO allied forces in Afghanistan, he's going to be one of the people who's going to monitor this. And it's going to be very important for a couple of things. There will continue, most likely, there will continue to be violence in that country. But General Miller will be tasked with determining attribution of any kinds of attacks. So that means if there's some sort of a small or even a larger scale attack, the U.S., in conjunction with the Afghan government, they're going to have to figure out, was the Taliban behind any of these attacks? And if anything happens, is that a break or a breach of this reduction of violence agreement? If they can get through these 7 days without any kind of a breach, then we'll get to that kind of a signing agreement, Eamon.
Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.